Today we're here to talk about the civil rights issue for the 1990s. And this is to ensure that all American children receive a quality education. The United States is great because of the education it provides its children. However, and most unfortunately, many children today don't receive a quality education. We do have, though, the means to ensure that all children can receive a quality education. And this is by providing parents with the means to select the school that they know is best for their children. This is called parental choice in education. The tape you're now going to see will tell you about this movement, and we hope that it will encourage you to become very involved in ensuring that all children receive a quality education.
What in the world? Hey! Parental choice in education? What's that?
You haven't heard of it?
I'm not sure. Is that like having a choice in the curriculum at my kid's school?
Almost. But it is more than that. Parental choice in education is becoming one of the hottest social and economic issues in the country today, in part because the rising costs, the declining quality, and the inherent inequity of education strikes at the heart of our nation's most pressing problems.
Is that right?
At the core of this issue is the growing debate over how the government spends your tax dollars on education. You see, under the current system, the portion of your taxes that goes towards education is allocated by the government directly to the public school system. Now, that would be fine if everyone were happy with the quality of public schools and agreed to send their kids there. The problem is that people are increasingly dissatisfied with the performance of the public system and are anxious to find viable alternatives. A choice system, on the other hand, would return to you, the parent, a portion of that tax money in the form of a scholarship voucher for each of your children. You, as a parent, therefore, would then be free to take the scholarship to the school you think would best serve the needs of your child. Your voucher, for example, could go to a public school, a private school, a specialized school, a religious school, indeed any school that you as a parent determined would be the best for your child. Today, if you choose to send your child to any school outside of the government-controlled system, you must pay for it yourself on top of the taxes you have already paid towards the public system. In effect, then, you're paying twice for the education of your children. For many Americans, this makes it impossible to consider educational alternatives for their children.
We pay dearly for the taxes around here, and the taxes supports the public school system, but unfortunately the public school system doesn't meet all the needs of our children. We have 5 kids and they all have different needs, and if we could afford it, we definitely would send them to private schools where the needs could be better met. But with the taxes we pay, there's no way we can afford it.
Indeed, choosing the best school for your child is becoming an exclusive privilege of the rich. You see, times have changed. Since 1950, for example, we've increased spending on public schools an average of 450% in constant dollars. This increase is such that of all industrialized nations, the United States ranks at the top in spending. But according to William Bennett, former U.S. Secretary of Education, all the money didn't help. Quote, "The period of the greatest educational decline in America was from 1963 to 1978. It was also the period of greatest increase in funding of education." End quote. Even the president of the powerful American Federation of Teachers openly admits that we are not getting our money's worth. Quote, 95% of the kids who go to college in the United States would not be admitted to college anywhere else in the world. End quote. And further, the 1992 National Assessment of Educational Progress stated that, quote, "Nationally, 50% of our public school graduates cannot do what the NAEP considers to be 7th grade work." End quote.
So what has all this money been spent on?
The sad reality is that more of your tax dollars have been spent on the bulging government school bureaucracy than on improving the quality of education. According to a controversial 1990 study in New York, only 33 cents of each public education dollar made its way into the classroom. The rest is eaten up by administrative expenses and a burgeoning bureaucracy. In 1980-81, for example, there was one teaching bureaucrat for every 109 students in New York. 10 years later, that ratio had increased one bureaucrat for every 76 students. This means the number of non-teacher employees increased by 28.4%, while the student population decreased by 10.3%. These figures are reflected throughout the country. In Maryland, for example, non-teaching staff increased by 43% between 1969 and 1989. Here, too, enrollment declined by 21%. Nationwide, the figures are staggering. Between 1960 and 1984, the number of students remained almost the same. But during that same period, the number of teachers rose 57%, the number of principals and supervisors grew by 79%, and the number of other staffers went up 500%.
But the results?
The results are seen in the increasing difficulty of our children to get a decent education. Again, even Albert Shanker of the American Federation of Teachers acknowledges the problem. Quote, "It's time to admit that public education operates like a planned economy, a bureaucratic system in which everybody's role is spelled out in advance, and there are few incentives for innovation and productivity. It's no surprise that our school system doesn't improve. It more resembles a communist economy than our own market economy." End quote. The problem this creates, according to many, is that the bureaucracy itself becomes more important than the education of America's young people. Senator Alphonse D'Amato of New York is an outspoken supporter of school choice and a critic of the government-controlled system.
In terms of protecting the bureaucracy, and as opposed to getting educational quality for youngsters.
Polly Williams, a Democratic state representative in Wisconsin, says she has encountered the same problem in her work to establish a successful Scholastic voucher system in Milwaukee to benefit that city's poor.
Issue of the teachers union is not the children, it's about teachers and keeping jobs. 1,000 kids leaving the public school means 25 teachers. They need 25 less teachers, and that's what they're concerned about, the teachers.
And then to add insult to injury, there are the many stories of waste and corruption in the public school system. Recently, for example, there were scandals involving misuse of educational monies through corruption and inefficiency. And other stories of how budgets that were allocated to educating our children were squandered instead on the pensions and perks of school administrators. The irony is that the loudest critics of Scholastic vouchers claim that the public school system would be okay if only we spent more money on it. The tragedy is that this public system seems tailor-made for abuse and inefficiency and to stifle the potential of not only the students, but also the creativity of those teachers who want to provide quality education.
I think we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question. Why is it that private schools have been able to post consistently higher academic results with fewer costs per student and far fewer administrators than public schools? Either public schools are doing something very wrong, or private schools are doing something very right, or both.
In Chicago, for example, the public school system has 33 times the number of administrators per student as the private schools in the same area. And nationally, 85% of those who graduate from private schools go on to college. Only 20% of those graduating from public schools go on to higher education. According to a Brookings Institute study by John Chubb and Terry Moe, quote, private schools cost an average of 50 to 60% of the public schools, with an average of a grade higher better performance, and in the cities, 2 grades higher, end quote. What is more important, these results are not just coming from one pampered socioeconomic group. Indeed, the composition of minority enrollees in all private schools in New York is similar to the statewide average for public schools. Even more striking, many Catholic schools in New York have substantial non-Catholic and minority enrollments, in some cases above 80% of those attending. And lest anyone think that these are simply the privileged elite, in inner-city Catholic schools, 93% of the students come from families living on the poverty level and still achieve academic standards exceeding the best public schools in the area.
Catholic schools in the inner city are now increasingly minority and poor and non-Catholic. And those schools are doing a tremendous job with those kids, and a much better job than the public schools are.
Now, these statistics disturb critics of scholastic vouchers, many of whom base their opposition on claims that vouchers would benefit only the rich. But the truth is, according to experts like John Gatto, a 2-time recipient of Teacher of the Year, there is an underlying belief in official circles that lower income groups are not capable of making sound educational choices on their own.
Well, now I realize that there's a huge suspicion, in this country especially, that the poor can't handle that. That was in the beginning of schooling, and gradually that suspicion has eaten its way up through the middle classes. Now we think the middle classes can't handle it, and it's beginning to nibble on the underside of the rich. Well, it's just nonsense, I can tell you.
This is echoed by Polly Williams.
You know, if you're poor, you're stupid and dumb, and you always got to be taken care of. And so you keep giving money to the professionals and the bureaucrats to take care of these poor folk. And so, and the poor folks keep getting poor. We keep getting worse off. We keep getting more and more money. We keep getting worse because all it does is the bureaucracy gets bigger, because the more money you give, the more people like them they find to give jobs, and less service we get. And we're sick and tired of service.
So many people making a serious sacrifice to send their kids to private schools. They must know something we don't to make such an effort to keep their kids out of the public school system.
Not only these parents. Did you know that increasing numbers of public school teachers themselves are sending their own children to private schools? In Chicago, for example, 46% of public school teachers send their children to private schools. Polly Williams describes the same problem in Milwaukee.
And 62% of the teachers who teach in Milwaukee public schools don't send their kids to the public schools. Those schools are not good enough for their kids. And see, but they know what's going on. But all the children that are left in the public schools are basically poor families, poor black, white, Hispanics, Asians, Indians, the poor parents.
Even the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, has abandoned the public school system to send his own daughter, Chelsea, to an exclusive Washington religious private school at a cost of $10,700 per year. In 1978, Jimmy Carter sent his daughter, Amy, to public school, but times have changed since then. But even though he has determined that public schools are unsuitable for his child, Mr. Clinton still opposes a scholarship voucher system that would give parents like you the option of choosing the best for your child.
You know, people said poor folks can't do nothing. They underestimate us, and that's the problem. People underestimate poor people. Poor people are no different than other folks. It's just that we don't have no money. We got the same needs, the same desires, same drives. It's just that we don't have money. And we want our kids educated. In fact, our children got to be educated because that's all we have. We don't have any money to leave them or some company. We don't have nothing but education to leave for our children.
What is equally interesting, experts predict parental choice in education will save taxpayers billions of dollars each year in states all over the country by creating an environment that challenges schools to compete for students. One such is Dr. Milton Friedman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist.
And the only way you're going to improve the school system, in my opinion, is by introducing competition and choice, and preferably the widest possible range of competition. Competition by religious schools, competition by special interest schools, competition by profit-making, schools established for profit, proprietary schools. I think that the tendency to try to restrict choice to public schools will not work, because it still leaves the public schools with a monopoly. It still limits choice.
Additionally, not only would increased competition force greater efficiency into the education system as a whole, reform would save us all from billions of dollars that are wasted each year as a consequence of poor education. According to David Kearns, former CEO of Xerox and an Assistant Secretary of Education in the Bush administration, public education has put this nation at a terrible competitive disadvantage. American business will have to hire 1 million new workers a year who can't read, write, or count. Teaching them how will cost $25 billion per year. End quote. The I Have a Dream Foundation states that school dropouts cost America a total of $250 billion per year. What's more, 82% of our jail population is made up of school dropouts, each one costing taxpayers around $32,000 per year. These drains on our economy are stifling the future of this country, because if America is to remain competitive into the 21st century, and if we are to continue pioneering technology and development, we will have to maintain and regain high standard education for all of our children.
Well, if a scholastic voucher system would provide an equitable alternative to the status quo, then why would anyone oppose it?
There is no single answer to that question. Supporters of scholastic vouchers point out that school bureaucracies have a vested interest in discouraging people from supporting free choice.
Well, what prevents parents from understanding the issue fully is a tremendous amount of fear on the part of people who make their living out of schooling. And they have been circulating massive amounts of scare propaganda. In one sense, it's understandable, and in another, it's horrendous.
This fear of choice surfaced as a political issue during the 1992 elections, with massive political spending by teachers' unions and their allies in the election efforts of opponents of the choice programs throughout the country. 8 days before the election, for example, the respected Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching released a study critical of school choice that generated widespread press criticism of the issue, and thus support for the position against vouchers. For example, according to a Carnegie poll, most Americans are opposed to choice in education. But a September 1992 Gallup poll showed that 70% of Americans favored choice, up from 50% a year ago. An Associated Press poll at the same time found that 63% of Americans supported a voucher system. And a Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies poll found that 88% of African American families favor a scholastic voucher system. But it is the established school bureaucracy and the vast power and resources of teachers' unions and organizations at its disposal that are at the core of the problem and at the core of the opposition to school choice programs. This opposition while often rooted in concern for maintaining standards of education, is just as often rooted in the simple desire to preserve jobs and maintain the bureaucracy. Consider this 1981 statement by the National Education Association, America's largest teachers' union. Quote, "The major purpose of our association is not the education of children. It is or ought to be the extension and/or preservation of our members' rights." End quote. Terry Moe points out that, after all, it is the quality of education that should be our first concern.
Well, I think really what it comes down to is what's best for kids. You know, and I think this business about, gee, what's the impact going to be on the public school system and all that, really ignores the fact that this is our money. You know, it's our tax money. We provide this money to pay for our kids to get a good education. And if it turns out that our kids can get a better education in a private school, then fine. I see no reason why the money shouldn't follow the kids to the school that they choose.
But then there are some who oppose choice because they can profit from the inefficiency of the current system.
There would be, I think, some damage to the sweetheart contracts that come where somebody negotiates with the State Department of Education to buy 100,000 textbooks that no one's ever going to use, and that sweetheart deal is conducted at full retail value, since no one else would buy those books if it came on the market, and then the books are stored in book rooms, and 2 or 3 years later they're all thrown out. Now that goes not only for books, but for such a wide range of exceedingly expensive equipment and consultation services that I think we're all better off without those. We need an economy that doesn't require quite the range of freeloaders that we're supporting through our school system right now.
Supporters of school choice point to the example of the U.S. Postal Service and how that institution has been revitalized by the stimulus of free market practices. Former Congressman Joseph DeAguardi, the only CPA ever elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, and an ardent supporter of choice in education, describes this idea.
Well, the problem with the school system is that we've got a monopoly. In fact, we had the same situation with the U.S. Postal Service. But the U.S. Postal Service got a challenge. They got a challenge from UPS and Federal Express. And it's a challenge they met. They got better. Well, we've got to bring these same kinds of market forces to bear with our schools. And I think the issue of choice by the parents, is going to send a very strong signal to the bureaucracy that controls the public school systems today that it's time to compete. It's time to get better.
This view is echoed by many experts in the field. One such is John Norquist, the mayor of Milwaukee.
Well, choice gives you accountability, because if people have a choice to go to a school, they also have a choice to go someplace else and leave that school. So if you're not doing the job, if people don't want to be in that school, then they'll go somewhere else. Choice helps. It, in a very natural way, without a lot of rules and regulations, will increase quality in the schools.
If we had a free market, even a controlled free market in school choice, we would have, certainly for the first few decades, an infinite number of opportunities for good teachers and energetic young teachers to open small schools, to team up with groups of parents, to affiliate with companies and institutions that would want to get into this. It would be, I think, a revelation similar to what occurred in the first 200 years of schooling, where...
And the money is helping the economy of our community, because we're hiring a lot of the parents and the community people. With this additional money, we're hiring more parents who come into schools now and working. We're getting people off of welfare with this program. See, this is the self-help program to help where we are and to make our schools better. And you know, we got a lot of white people running and trying to get in our black schools now, because they're good schools. And if you make the schools good, they will be integrated, because people are going to follow quality. It don't matter who's there. As long as there's quality going on, we're going to have the people there. And most of the...
But aren't there other issues in question? Isn't there growing concern about the content of curriculums in government-run schools?
Indeed, concerns of both content and quality are the final motivator for many parents to step up at this time and support a Scholastic voucher system for their area. Dr. Joseph Page, Dean of the Shaw Divinity School in Raleigh, North Carolina, says that a voucher program puts the right to choose the content of education with the parents where it should be.
Who teaches my child, and I can have a greater impact to me in the content of what he or she might be taught. And I think that's important.
According to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, quote, parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children, end quote. And further, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Pierce versus the Society of Sisters that, quote, the fundamental theory of liberty excludes any general power of the state to standardize its children by forcing them to accept instruction from public teachers only. The child is not a mere creature of the state, end quote. But unfortunately, while the focus of education should be our children, in fact, they have become like pawns in a chess game, set aside for political and other agendas, and it is their education that has suffered as a result.
I'm a public school parent. A Scholastic voucher program would benefit my family through giving me more power and ability to make decisions about my children's education. Not only would it give me the ability to make a better decision, but it would encourage me to stay involved throughout the entire cycle of my child's education.
The most revolutionary aspect of school choice is that for the first time in history, it transfers power over the most important decisions that a child has, from bureaucrats to parents.
Parental empowerment. You mean we as parents having a say?
You as parents having the real say. A Scholastic voucher system is widely feared by the entrenched bureaucracies. You should be aware of this. They raise the issue of separation of church and state, claiming that a voucher system would be the same as the government funding religious schools. But this is not the truth. Listen to Joe Diaguardi.
That's a misconception. The use of scholarship vouchers to send children to religious schools is not a violation of church and state. As a CPA, I can tell you that this is not money going to religious institutions. This is money going to individuals. As a matter of fact, this is tax dollars that these citizens are able to spend themselves. This is no different than getting Social Security money. Under the old GI Bill, it's no different than the GIs getting the money and deciding what schools they wanted to go to. As a matter of fact, would the government tell you how to spend your tax refund? No, that's your money. The same here. It's as simple as that.
The public agenda, to me, ought to be one of saying, let's try vouchers, let's test this thing out, and let's see what will happen. I believe the long run, the fears that they have now would be expelled. In the long run, they'd see improved public education as well as improved education, even in the private schools, if we had this kind of spirit going on.
The GI Bill was used with great success to fund the education of our veterans after World War II. It gave everyone the same advantage to pursue any kind of education, at state schools, private schools, or even religious institutions. This and other government programs, such as Pell Grants that benefit families earning less than $20,000, have stimulated American higher education so that it is now the finest system in the world.
Take a portion of the public funds that we spend on education today and use that money in a private, parochial, or public institution. If we do that, we could create competition in the public school systems that does not now exist, and in many ways, it would be equated to what we do in higher education.
It is time to extend the same fairness and opportunities to all of our children. Scholarship vouchers will be legislated on a state-by-state basis. To support this effort in your state, 1. Call and write your state senator and your state assemblyman. 2. Vote for those who directly support scholarship vouchers. 3. Contact and support the group in your state that is working for scholarship vouchers. 4. Call for referrals and to order more of these tapes